We got Michael, Freddy, Jason, now Johnny. I've been looking forward to the slasher In a Violent Nature for several months now. It provides a new presentation by showing us the story from the perspective of a brutal killer. So does it work? When a locket is removed from a collapsed fire tower in the woods that entombs the rotting corpse of Johnny, his body is resurrected and becomes hellbent on retrieving it. Now, I think when a horror can introduce a killer with a deliberate and unstopping walk, the level of menace just goes up way past 11. I mean, there's nothing more freaky than a determined slasher, walking unhurriedly but steadily towards its prey, undaunted by terrain or obstacles. And we, as the audience, know this unstoppable force is about to bring all sorts of bloody mayhem for our enjoyment. In a Violent Nature combines serious art house sensibilities with the bloody and gruesome gore of any B-budget slasher. And this doesn't look or feel like a B movie, though. The visuals are stunning and foreboding, utilizing cinematography that builds dreadful suspense thanks to shadowy imagery and patient camera work. Now, a lot of people might find this movie slow, even boring for a lot of it. There are certainly portions that feel as if we're watching Bilbo go on his very long walk to wake up a dragon. And I can see that perspective. I mean, for the long stretches, the camera will be locked down and stationary, just focused on a set piece. I mean, even for minutes before anything actually happens, too. And I get it. I mean, I'm staring at this pole in the ground. The characters have moved on, and now it's basically just forest noise with nothing happening. But for me, that's also what works to build out the intrigue. I was inching my way closer to the screen as the seconds went by because I knew there was something I was supposed to see. Even if there wasn't anything, the visuals had captured my attention and then held me spellbound. And that's what we get through a lot of this. Lingering shots on a setting, patiently waiting for a character to enter the scene where hopefully somebody's going to meet a bloody end. But in addition to these static shots, there are also some wonderful seamless takes that I found to be immersive and riveting. In one scene, which is a very necessary plot-building act, a story is being recounted around a campfire. The camera starts out by moving in and out of the circle to capture the interactions of the group. But as the storytelling begins, the camera moves outside of the circle and then revolves around the group, capturing the faces of each of them in the physical breaks that are between the shoulders and backs. It's a beautiful but also unnerving sequence. And not only from the dialogue, but from the atmosphere and environment that the scene takes place in. And that being said, there is some shaky cam footage that I could have done without. I mean, I don't mind camera movement as we follow behind Johnny. It actually adds realism as if we're walking behind him. But when things get all hectic, it obscures the visuals and it doesn't match what we're presented with through the majority of the film. Now, there is a lot of walking in this. So much of it is just watching Johnny, the killer, traipse through the forest in search of his next victim. I mean, almost exclusively, we see his back, his hulking and hunched menace, plodding intently towards another unsuspecting young adult. Now, there is a brief moment when we get to see Johnny's face. I really wish they had kept this out. I mean, I loved the makeup and the visuals, but a faceless killer, way more terrifying. If I'm not shown the face, it can be anything disturbing that my mind imagines, which is typically way worse and dreadful than what's displayed on screen. And again, this didn't ruin the experience, but it did lessen some of that dread. Now, a few small elements in the story reminded me of Tucker and Dale, not in a comedic sense, but just in some of the action and small bits of dialogue. And because I watch that movie several times a year, it's always fresh in my mind. If you're not, though, familiar with that comedy horror, or at least as familiar as I am, I don't think you're going to see any similarities. Really, though, this has nothing to do with anything other than I found it amusing. Now, just like in any horror movie, there is some suspension of disbelief that you need to have. So many times Johnny is walking towards a victim, and he definitely is visible, but the characters, they just don't see his movement or even this figure coming at them. And it's mostly unrealistic, but not something I really got hung up on. Especially because typically we are rewarded with a spectacular display of creative violence. Now, I'm not going to tell you the specific ways people meet their end, but many are satisfyingly grotesque, showcasing new levels of brutality that are both fun and bloody. And one I don't think I've ever seen done this way before. Now, some of this presentation reminded me of the Blair Witch Project, not in the forest or death sense, but in the exposition. We're told stories in two sequences, and they are both delivered in mesmerizing ways. They're quietly told, nothing demonstrative or outlandish, just earnest and dreadful tales that set the stage and reinforce the lore. And outside of the violence, I thought these were the two most important and impressive narrative elements. And really, the way this story works, it is a little different. mean, even though Johnny is the killing machine, and so he's obviously the villain, he's also a justified protagonist in a twisted sort of way. I mean, all of the victims, they're basically nobodies. Their names are unimportant, and we know pretty much nothing about them. But their actions have created the ensuing sequence of events, even if they did so unwittingly. And the character we know the most about is Johnny. And even that may or may not be true. But even if what we're told is only ghost story conjecture, it's way more character development than any of the college kids receive. Now, Johnny's backstory, it does run the risk of making him less menacing or freaky because there is some sort of rationale for him. But unlike Michael Myers and Rob Zombie's Halloween remake, Johnny isn't sympathetic because of his backstory. He's still a merciless killer hell-bent on his quest. So overall, In a Violent Nature is a unique telling for a slasher film. Watching the story play out from the killer's perspective adds a different level of apprehension, keeping all other players as unknown strangers as they progress towards their demise. The violence and gore are wonderfully captured, utilizing creatively disgusting practical effects designed to trigger gag reflexes. The storytelling can drag as the camera endlessly follows the walking killer, creating a sense of directionless boredom, but the exposition elements help to offset this by introducing captivating lore that adds mystique and dread to the narrative. While not every device works, especially with lingering shots of inaction, the boldness of this new perspective certainly warrants a watch. There's no sex or nudity, a lot of profanity, and a ton of gruesome violence. I give In a Violent Nature 3.5 out of 5 couches. So have you seen any really great slashers recently? Let me know what you watched in the comments below. If you enjoyed this review, please give it a like. Also, don't forget to share and subscribe. I'm Chris. This is Movies and Munchies. Thanks for couching with me.